What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show. We're diving into some Dynasty trades today to make it the conclusion of kind of your trade deadline, if you have one. If you still play with the trade deadline, though, in Dynasty, what are you doing? You need to fix that. I am on a mission. Stop having trade deadlines in your leagues. It ruins your leagues. It tanks the ability for tankers to rebuild as they go. It ruins the overall health of the league. Get rid of trade deadlines. But I digress because I don't want you coming at me in the... Actually, no, you should come at me in the comments. Boost that algorithm for me. Yell at me about trade deadlines. Let me know what you think there. But we're going to be talking about all trades here in the first, part of the show here on YouTube. And if you listen to the podcast for the first 30 minutes. So let's dive into it. So right now, there's a bunch of different player values out there. A lot of fun. We have a 2020 first for Tank Dell. So we got to start talking about Tank Dell because I think from a dynasty perspective, because of it's so reactionary, now we're starting to see Tank really kind of come to his own because CJ Stroud is ultra targeting him. When you're looking at overall he's at 35 targets the last 3 games. He's been a high producer. You're talking about a wide receiver 1 and 3 in those weeks that he got really that production in week 9 and week 11, week 10. He was still a top 12 guy. So are you giving up a 2024 first, Jeff? Where are you at with him?
I'm going to go on a tangent here because we are at the point in the season now where you should know if this first is early or late. And not only that, the most frustrating thing is people are speaking in abstracts when it comes to draft picks, but you can go to Kevin Coleman's work, you can go to Kevin Coleman's big board, and you can see what that pick means. What are you going to get? Is this pick going to be between 8 and 10? Okay, well, let's go to Kevin's big board, and we're looking at like a guy like Keon Coleman or Roma Dunze, players like that. And so you're looking at another receiver. Now, right now, I think in theory, I understand in theory to say, well, I used a 3rd-round pick on Tank Dell, and now I can get a first for him. That's instant profit. And if that's your mindset, yeah, I can kind of get that. But at the same time, we're seeing Tank Dell immediately produce as a rookie, as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy borderline many weeks. And he is paired with a young quarterback who looks like an absolute phenom in CJ Stroud. And so this is what you want. And so like to turn this into a first, you're really hoping, one, you're hoping for a good landing spot to be paired with a quarterback similar to CJ Stroud for whatever rookie comes in. 2, you're hoping that player is actually good, that you're able to draft at that pick. So all these different things that you need to hit in order to capitalize. Whereas Tank Dell is already giving you a borderline wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. And so that's, I lean on Tank Dell, but I understand the mindset of if you think that I gave a 3rd and now I get a 1st and I make profit, I can kind of get that. But let's stop talking in abstract about where this pick is, because if this is Caleb Williams, then yeah, I want Caleb Williams over Tank Dell.
Yeah, I think there's a nice case to be made for Tank Dell being worth this at this moment. This Texans offense is passing a lot more than I think a lot of people anticipated, right? You thought they would kind of lean on the run and bring the rookie along slowly. They didn't need to. CJ Stroud is here, and he's throwing the ball at a crazy high rate. I think Dave Kluge tweeted out that Tank Dell's first read targets were down with Nico Collins back, but it doesn't matter when CJ Stroud is performing the way that he is, and you kind of can project forward. I don't necessarily think that they're looking to replace any of these guys. I think Nico Collins and Tank Dell will be major parts of this offense next year, and provided that Bobby Slowick stays, I think this offense is going to be one of those where you want to get every piece that you possibly can. Now, maybe not the running back position at this moment. Maybe they go out and fix that, and then that is something that you try to acquire as well. But yeah, I mean, right now, I think you can make a very solid case for Tank Dell being worth a Roma Dunze or even a Travion Henderson at the back of the first round potentially, or whoever's sliding into those last few picks. Now, if it's the middle of the round and it's like Brock Bowers for Tank Dell, I still probably lean Brock Bowers, but I think Jeff hit the nail on the head when he said, we have proof that this kid is good in the NFL, and you're taking a risk if you go out and get the first. So I think I'd like to be safe and just keep a piece of this Texans offense. So I kind of lean Tank Dell here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at my big board right now. I'd probably draw the line at 105. Bowers, Malik Neighbors, Drake May, Marvin Harrison Jr., Caleb Williams. After that, I get it. I understand with Tank Dell. Like if I could flip him for Xavier Worthy at 106 or Keon Coleman or Troy Franklin, those guys, you might do it because and you're thinking about like I'm projecting forward too. We don't know what their guys' landing spots are. What we do know is that Tank Dell is in a fairly good landing spot. He found himself on a roster that's going to utilize him. He's with a superstar quarterback in the making, it looks like, if we're going to project him that much with CJ Stroud. And when you look at it too, I think the Texans, they've talked about them being in the running for like maybe a wide receiver one in the offseason. I know I've talked about it too. They need a lot of help on their D line, especially their interior defensive line and even O line. Maybe they spend their money there and they look at their wide receiver room and saying, hey, we've made this happen. Look at how much we're scoring. Look at our offensive output. We maybe don't need to go spend up for a wide receiver. We have our pieces in place already. We have a tight end. We have these guys. Like, let's go target that defensive line, offensive line, and build from there because they definitely need some help on the defensive line. And so, hey, let's just go there. And I think that's what makes Tank Dell kind of an interesting piece after that 106 mark. If it's a late first, I don't mind taking a shot on that, especially if you're a contender right now. He's a contender-worthy piece. So you go grab him. Yeah. Is that it? All right. We got Tank Dell out of the way. Let's go over to Josh Dobbs and see what you guys think about him. So he had an okay performance last week. He did lose. The Vikings did lose there. But Josh Dobbs for a 24 second and a 24 fourth. To me, I'm smashing the second and the fourth. That's how I look at Josh Dobbs on this one. Because I'm concerned Josh Dobbs might not be able to hold up Jared Hall as the season progresses if he continues to struggle there, because they did give Hall that shot there. I'd take the picks if I could afford it and I had a solid QB2. If Dobbs is my QB3, I'd take whatever that could get for him at this point, the picks, and go from there. Where are you at, Jeff?
I agree. I think capitalizing the second and the fourth. I mean, I understand that we're in a moment with Josh Dobbs, and maybe the shine came off a little bit last night because the Denver's defense certainly hit him around a little bit, and that was kind of a quiet fantasy performance. I don't know what is going on, to be honest with you, on Josh Dobbs, because through the first 4 games with the Cardinals, he was pretty good. And then if his play fell off very hard, but his fantasy points were still okay. And now going to Minnesota, his first couple of games, his play was very good. His play started to fall off on Sunday night against the Broncos. And so I think that I've called him the evolutionary Ryan Fitzpatrick. We've seen Ryan Fitzpatrick where as soon as he starts to get comfortable in a job, that play falls off a little bit and you're kind of moving on to the next team. And the idea that Josh Dobbs is suddenly this franchise quarterback because he's scoring fantasy points, it just doesn't track. It's just not, I don't buy it at all. And whether or not if he continues this ride for Minnesota, makes the playoffs and maybe wins a game, then yeah, maybe Minnesota says, well, we'll go with Dobbs as our 1A, but we're also going to draft a guy and give us a backup plan here because we're not going to put all our eggs in this basket. Absent that, I just really think he's kind of on like I said, the Ryan Fitzpatrick track where maybe somebody will bring him in because he's intelligent. He can pick up the playbook. He can move. He can make some plays. And so he's on the upper echelon of backup quarterbacks. But NFL history is written by guys that are backup quarterbacks that are able to be upper echelon guys for limited windows. And then kind of the other shoe falls.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're getting this deal right now, it's kind of smart to move off of it before the Bears game, which is a crazy thing to say. But the Bears have been quite good against opposing teams. Their defense has played well outside of 2-minute drills and things like that. That's the matchup on Monday night. I think that people could. There's still this perception of Josh Dobbs that he is this really good fantasy asset. He's running all over the place. He's doing those things. 2 bad performances in a row. We don't have enough proof that Josh Dobbs is legit to not take the picks here. But I will say, with the state of quarterbacking in the NFL and still some uncertainty about this incoming class, I think there's a good shot that Josh Dobbs starts for a team at some point next year, maybe even for a full year. When gosh, we're about to get Tim Boyle this week. Like, I think I'd take Josh Dobbs as one of the 32 best quarterbacks right now, but that 2024 second alone is probably worth more than that because I just don't see him sticking for a long time. So While it's and I'm happy for him, I'm glad he's getting this moment, but I think teams do kind of catch up to him. And he's very much so an improv type of quarterback where if you can take away his improv, he's fine. He's okay. But not something to sway me away from these picks.
Real quick, what do you think is more likely, that Josh Dobbs becomes somebody's franchise quarterback, or Josh Dobbs becomes one of these guys that, as you draft like maybe a Bryce Young and you want to bring in a veteran quarterback just in case he's not ready to start the season, and starts to fall into that cycle where every single year there's another rookie that you're going to bring a guy in that can kind of play those first 4 or 5 games, like the Jacoby Brissett's of the world, Andy Dalton nows of the world. I mean, which is the more likely scenario? And if somebody were to give you a second round pick for Jacoby Brissett or Andy Dalton right now, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah, and I think there's also a move. This happened in a league I was in. Someone traded Josh Dobbs and DK Metcalf for T. Higgins and Joe Burrow, and the other side was like completely out. This other side wants to win it, and he needed a quarterback. He lost Joe Burrow, and he went and got DK. Now it's a terrible deal for the guy that got Joshua Dobbs and DK Metcalf, but it happened, and we got to talk about it because they're out there. Like there are a lot of guys right now that want to go win, and if you can maybe kind of pivot and get some of these guys that are injured, you do that, and you kind of capitalize on that. We will also mention that we were having a Black Friday sale here at Football Guys. 20% off the first year of Football Guys subscriptions, custom tools, rankings, and advice here for you guys. 20% off Football Guys merchandise. This offer is going to end Monday, November 27th. You can find it in the description below. There's a link down there and also the QR code that pops up. So be sure to go out there and find it. It is also in, if you're listening on the podcast, the show description. So go find it. Football Guys Black Friday sale. It's a heck of a deal. So go find it now. Also, before we move on to our next kind of few trades we go into, like this video, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode, and then comment below with your questions, trades, or thoughts on the topic.
Make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a premium subscriber. Elite subscribers get custom Dynasty content for less than $15 monthly or $70 annually. We have the best Dynasty content in the fantasy football industry. Join today.
All right, we're going to jump around and just kind of talk about some trades that we've seen. We crowdsourced these and we talked about it and said, hey, we like these. We've got some of these from YouTube channel. So, Christian, what deal do you want to talk about? What is a deal out there that you think is an interesting value?
I am interested in the Lamar Jackson for Jamar Chase straight up deal that is on this show sheet. And the reason I'm so interested in that is, I think you can make a case that those top end wide receivers are worth an elite quarterback, right? I think that's the only way you move off of those pieces. Now, I have to assume that this was a team needs type of situation where one contender wanted to get a second quarterback or something like that, and the other contender lost a wide receiver, something of that nature. Would you guys trade Jamar Chase straight up for Lamar Jackson, though, even in Superflex? Because when I saw that deal, I was like, okay, I need to set the line where I would be comfortable doing that. Lamar Jackson is below that line, I think. I think there's a very select few quarterbacks that I would be willing to do this with. What do you guys think?
I mean, this is a simple one that if you were in a Superflex startup, and who would you take first? And I think 9 times out of 10, the person would take Lamar Jackson first over Jamar Chase in a Superflex startup. And so if I'm going to move off this deal, I'm going to get something along with it as well. I'm not doing it straight up. You're going to give me something. You're going to pay that quarterback premium. And so, and I understand how this can arise, especially when you've got a breakout like CJ Stroud. I mean, CJ Stroud was falling into the middle of the first round last year. And so you could easily get into a situation where you've got maybe Stroud, maybe Tua, maybe Justin Fields, and you're feeling comfortable with 2 of those guys. And you also have Lamar, and you're saying, I want to get an elite player at another position. But if you are in that case, outside of like definitely wanting to go with the youth on a guy like Stroud, why wouldn't you just trade the other quarterback and keep Lamar, who would be valued higher, I think, in almost every situation than the Jamar Chase?
I don't know. To me, I think I draw the line at like Justin Herbert for Jamar, but I might actually take Jamar. It really kind of depends. I think if you hit on a CJ Stroud though, or something, like if you were able to hit on one of these guys and then you have Lamar as kind of that flex piece where you're able to kind of off of him, I think that's kind of the part of it. Then Jeff's going to hate the trade that I did because I traded Joe Burrow straight up for Justin Jefferson. and that's the
That's
one
a
I
good
did
deal.
recently. And I thought it was interesting because I think they're back to back, but I lost Burrow. I have a fine QB1 and QB2, so I have Dak as my QB1. And in my quarterback too, I do have Baker Mayfield, but I do also have Dobbs. So I have like this little weird piece where I'm like, I got these guys here, and then I got Justin Jefferson, and I think I could do it. Don't laugh at me. I'm gonna go win with Dak Prescott, Jeff, and you're gonna love me for it. But I wanted Jefferson because the way I looked at it as well, like if I don't win it this year, I can still move off Jefferson for an elite quarterback again because I just did it, and he's still gonna have that value. So there's possible to go out there and get it in terms of that. So yeah, that's kind of how I lean with this deal. I think Jamar, there's a line with Herbert that I probably wouldn't do, but Lamar, I think I would do. I think that's part of the area there. All right, I'm going to pick a deal here. I like this deal, and this is a fun one. CeeDee Lamb, who is absolutely balling the last few weeks, he's been a true wide receiver one, for a 24 first, a 24 second, Josh Downs and Dalton Kincaid. Now, non-tight end premium, so it's just regular premium there. And it's funny because Downs is Christian's guy. Dalton Kincaid is Jeff's guy. Then we have a first and second mixed in here. Is this the price of CeeDee Lamb now? Like, is this where we're at with CeeDee? Is this appropriate value, Jeff? Or you think this is a little bit too much?
I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot to get. If I don't know, and you guys know how I am. Like, I'm going to hold the elite asset unless you just knock my socks over. But that's the type of deal that might knock my socks over to offer that much because. But I do think that, and I've written that I think the gap that CeeDee Lamb over the last month has really closed the gap between him and Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. I don't know that he's definitely not in front of those other two, but in my mind, I think he's closed that to be comfortable dynasty wide receiver 3 from the production that we've seen over the past couple weeks, the way that offense is flowing through Lamb. If you were to move off of him, I mean, you're looking at this. Kincaid, I think, has an elite level ceiling at the tight end position, which to move off of him, I want a younger piece that does have an elite level ceiling. And then you're giving me a potential for the first and then a second and Downs, which I would value Downs more than a second, but they're kind of in similar ballpark. And so to make this deal, I need an elite young piece like Kincaid can be. I need a first, which can turn into a second one, and then I need a little bit more, and that's what this deal satisfies. I think this is a really interesting deal, and I think this is a good trade.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at as well. I think I'm interested to see how Kincaid's value changes down the stretch here now that they've moved to Joe Brady as their play caller. We know he likes the tight end position. I know Jeff had a nice tweet about, the production over the last 5 weeks. Dalton Kincaid has kind of matched Stephon Diggs as the primary option in this offense. And I think that that's worth noting because I think that when we talk about the tight end position, that's more important. I think that, of course, you can't get CeeDee Lambs everywhere. And so I think that's the part where I still kind of lean CeeDee in this deal. But I fully understand if you want to move off of that, get a little bit younger. Maybe you're in a bit of a teardown here. You're one of those middle tier teams where you don't think you can go out, actually win a championship. This is a nice move to make where I feel like you're getting adequate value back. On the other side of things, a contender should be going out and getting CeeDee Lamb, and I would actually argue, provided that you're not completely tanking out, adding CeeDee Lamb at any point is a good strategy for dynasty fantasy football. So, good deal on both sides. I lean CeeDee though.
Yeah, I'll pay this for CeeDee all day on a contender. Like, just go get it. Like, I think that's how I look at this deal. Like, go grab it. He's been wide receiver 1 last 3 weeks. I mean, and last week they didn't really need him against the Panthers because it kind of gave script out of there. But you got to realize, like, he's getting targeted right now. Like, he's got 44 targets in the 3 weeks that he put up wide receiver 1 numbers, and last week he had 9. So he's had over 50 targets the last 4 games. That's ridiculous. They're finally doing what they needed to do with CeeDee, and that's getting the ball at every stop, every throw. They're just gonna look for CeeDee Lamb, and that's a good success. And that's what you have for Dak. All right, Jeff, give me a deal that you like, you thought was interesting.
The Austin Eckler and Cooper Kupp for Zay Flowers, a 24 first and a 24 second deal, I think is pretty interesting because right now, I mean, you can make the argument that maybe you're selling low on Eckler and Cooper Kupp. I think you can also make the argument that you're getting out while you can on Eckler and Cooper Kupp. And so to do this type of deal, to grab Zay Flowers, who is a young player that has shown himself to have upside, to have you feel good about him going forward, and it's interesting how the Ravens wide receiver room is going to shake out with Mark Andrews now removed, because we could see Flowers really come on strong down the stretch and realistically could match the production that you're getting. Cooper Kupp has an injury. We don't know where he's going to be the rest of the year. And Austin Eckler looked definitely slow against the Packers. And I think that that's one of the things that when a running back looks slow in the NFL, it doesn't, at that age, it doesn't usually come back. And it usually in Dynasty, that means the value tanks out quite hard. And so to look at this deal, to move off Cooper Kupp and Austin Eckler, to grab Flowers, to grab a first and a second, I think is doing very well. I think that this is the target, that if you're going to move off these veteran players, this is what you want to do. You want to grab a young player that you feel like has already hit. You want to grab draft picks, and that's exactly what it gets accomplished in this deal.
Yeah. So I would really like this deal if it were some other young piece, and not Zay Flowers. I'm not as in on Zay Flowers. I think, while I do believe in this Baltimore passing attack and this Baltimore team in general, he's not one of those guys that I'm actively looking to add to my roster, because I do think that there's a lot of variance. On the other side of things, this is clearly one of those, contenders moving off of, some guys, right? So Eckler and Kupp on a contending team, I feel like that's you're really pushing toward a championship, provided that Eckler, that slowness doesn't appear down the stretch, and then provided that Kupp is not hurt and a shell of himself down the stretch as well. For that, I mean, I would take really a first if I could get it for Eckler in general. And so I feel like that part wins, and then Zay Flowers plus a second is probably around what I would take for Cooper Kupp, even though I'm not super interested in Flowers. So I still lean that side of things, but I do think that this is appropriate value. If you added a piece like for me, even, I know Zay is averaging like 10 fantasy points per game. I would rather Josh Downs on that side. You guys all know that. But that's someone I'd be more interested, or like a Tank Dell, for example, although I think the Eckler Kupp side would say no to that. So but yeah, I still lean the side with the picks.
I think you bring up an interesting thing about trading in terms of not particularly loving the young piece, but when you're trying to deal players like Eckler and Cooper Kupp, you're dealing with a limited market within your league. You only have a handful of players in your league that would be interested in those players. And so a lot of times, like I feel like I get a lot of pushback because I make a lot of trades and I'll ask opinions on those, and people will give pushback and they'd be like, "Oh, well, I would want a little bit more here or whatnot." You're dealing with what you can deal with, and so if you're in a situation where, yeah, maybe you would rather have Josh Downs or maybe you would rather have Dell, but the person that is willing to pay that price for Eckler and Kupp has Zay Flowers, and they're willing to give the pick. Sometimes you just have to take that what you can get. And then if you don't love that piece, I think one of the biggest things I see break down in trade negotiations is somebody might not love one piece and they'll say, well, I don't want to do that deal. But you need to think ahead and you need to say, okay, maybe I don't love Zay, but I want to capitalize on the value and get out of Eckler and Kupp now. And this is what's available to get out of those players now. I can take Zay and I can move him into another deal. And I think that one of the biggest things Dynasty players struggle is to think ahead of that and to take the best you can get from the available market and to spin that ahead instead of, I have gotten so many offers declined because the one random player that I put in the deal because they need to drop somebody, they'll say, well, I don't want to give up that player. And it's like, we're going to cut him. He's the worst guy on your roster. And I'm sorry that you need to find out that way, but that is the only reason why I clicked that button. So to turn that deal down because of that, you are losing the forest from the trees. But I think that happens so often.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, hey, like I would love to have Christian Kirk instead of Zay Flowers, but depending on like your value, like if I want to go compete next year, I might actually like Christian Kirk. Like, hey, I'll put him in there. But if I want to like maybe move off that piece, I'm not going to trade for Christian Kirk because I like, well, he's going to be that pretty much that same value for the next 2 years. Zay, there's always a believer in these Zay guys and like these rookies and these guys that pop off. And that is a very good point. A rare good point by Jeff Bell. All right, let's go to one of my favorites I saw here. CJ Stroud, Garrett Wilson, and a 24-second for Patrick Mahomes, Chris Olave at a 24-second. Fascinating. This is a fascinating deal because I do think Garrett Wilson is better than Olave. Like, so I kind of lean Garrett Wilson there. 24 seconds are basically the same. So this person is saying basically they believe CJ Stroud can be Patrick Mahomes-esque in Dynasty. That's like a top 5 asset. And they believe Garrett Wilson is that dude too. Like maybe next year the quarterback gets better here. This one's tough for me, but I'm still leaning Patrick Mahomes and Olave just because it is Patrick Mahomes. And I think with the asset there, but this is almost 50-50 in my opinion. Like it is extremely close here. I know. Where are you going with this one, Christian?
It's tough because CJ Stroud has outproduced Patrick Mahomes this year. And so when you start to look at that, I don't necessarily think that this one is a contender moving to a rebuilding team necessarily. I think this is just getting your preferred players. I do think that the difference between Wilson and Olave might be great enough to, move from Patrick Mahomes to CJ Stroud because of how highly I think of CJ Stroud. I can't express enough. Like one of the interceptions he threw this week was a tip pass. It was a perfectly thrown ball. But I can't express enough how good this kid has been as a rookie. And we kind of can project forward. I mean, I think top 5 is going to be kind of, especially with the Burrow injury, I wouldn't be shocked if CJ Stroud inched his way into that. And I've been a believer that Patrick Mahomes has always been overvalued as the Dynasty QB1. Mm-hmm. I just never really thought that he was in the same tier as Josh Allen, simply because of the rushing aspect of things. So I don't think that the difference between those two is that vast. When you get into the Wilson versus Olave, I think you can project a huge breakout year for Wilson next year when he has an actual quarterback. So that's where I think I understand it, but I also still believe in Chris Olave. So it's kind of tough because, I think you're trading safety. You're just trading safety away for a little bit of risk with Stroud and with Wilson. But I think that move could look smarter in 2 years. I don't mind either side. That's the coward way of saying good trade, everyone.
I think it's a smash accept for the Mahomes side, to be honest with you. I hear your arguments on CJ Stroud, and certainly I'm thrilled with the way that he's played so far. There's no risk in Mahomes outside of injury. I mean, there is always a risk that things just fall apart for Stroud or things struggle in the second half of the year. And to be able to do this type of deal where you're adding Patrick Mahomes, and I hear your argument that Josh Allen should be valued above him as the Dynasty quarterback 1. I have no concerns for the next 10 years on Patrick Mahomes finishing as a top 5 quarterback year in, year out in fantasy. And so that to be able to make this deal without materially affecting like your structure, you're not giving up multiple first round picks. You're doing a 1-for-1. And while you might like Garrett Wilson more than Olave, I think that they'll be in the same ballpark, maybe point wise. And I think that you're kind of dealing with still kind of a Dynasty wide receiver 1, more or less. So to be able to kind of have like assets to fill out a deal to flip CJ Stroud off of 11 good games for Patrick Mahomes is the type of deal that you should do all day in Dynasty.
This is why I love Dynasty though, because I think it's 50-50. Like I think it's close. I think it really kind of comes down to what your preference is between Wilson and Olave, how big that gap is. Christian's crazy, and he loves CJ Stroud, so he's going to be all a part of that. And he's like, hey, that's there. And Jeff's like, oh, this is Mahomes. What are you guys talking about? But that's the point. Like, that's why we talk about these and work you through these things. I want to go through a couple more really quick, though. Like, no talking, Jeff. Just answer it. Got to go through here. And just let's just really verbatim. There was a Joe Burrow for Trevor Lawrence. which with Burrow out for the year, are you comfortable tearing down a little bit to Trevor Lawrence, Jeff, on this one?
Burrow for me.
Burrow?
Yeah, you need another piece on the Lawrence side for it to be correct. And by correct, I mean just like valued the way I value it. There is no correct. But yeah, but Burrow.
Yeah, I think, I think that's fine. I think I understand their Lawrence side after you just had that big game. This happened after you just had that big game, and like a manager's like, oh, I need to go win it. This is why you shouldn't have trade deadlines. That's all I'm saying, because then you can go get Joe Burrow for next year in your leagues. This one's an interesting one. Brian Robinson for a second, third, and a fourth. I mean, if I have Brian Robinson is in that purgatory second. People will pay a second, but they won't pay a first. So like, there's a weird area there. Would you be willing to give up Brian Robinson off your roster for a second, third, or fourth, Jeff, or you hold out for a first?
If I'm contending, I'm keeping Brian Robinson pretty comfortably. I like Brian Robinson quite a bit. I think he's one of the more underrated pieces in Dynasty. So that's the side that I lean on probably. I mean, if I'm in a complete rebuild and I've got Robinson and that's the best I can do, then that's the best I can do. But other than that, I like Robinson.
I think if you make that a like 24 second, 25 second, I'm interested.
Yeah.
But the third and the fourth don't really move the needle for me.
No.
And I'm, notably overconfident in those areas of drafts. So if I'm notably overconfident, then I think most people should wait. And if they can get a first, especially if they can get a first, but 2 seconds probably do it. If you're a contender, keep Robinson for sure.
All right. And then the last one I want to do real quick, and then we will be done here on YouTube. Javonte Williams and a second for Zay Flowers. Javonte Williams' value is all over the place right now, like with the way there. I think I lean that side though, because a second, and then you got Zay, and I'm not that high on Zay in terms of this kind of deal, because I think I could flip Javonte again if I need to, or even that second if I need to. Where are you leaning on this one, Jeff?
I'm Javonte Williams in a second, comfortably over Zay Flowers for me. I think that you talk about Javonte Williams' value being all over the place. I think there's some people that are paying attention and some people that aren't. But for the most part, he's been that bell cow role for the Broncos. And we didn't see it as much last night, but the last couple of weeks, he's really stepped forward in that role.
Yeah, I mean, Javonte is a top 10 running back in Dynasty, in my opinion. And I understand that people are kind of moving off of that take because of, the slowish start and the injury and things like that. But I kind of feel comfortable putting him inside my top 8, really, I think is where I might have him. I have an update due soon, so I don't actually know. But yeah, and then you add this. I think the second's on the wrong side here, honestly.
Probably. Yeah. But maybe go test your market for Zay Flowers. He seems to be going for a lot higher than I would imagine.
There are people that love Zay Flowers.
Yeah.
All right. The full version of every show can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcast. Be sure to head over there. Leave us a review. Like I said last week, someone trashed my Tua Tagovailoa take, but left a 4-star review. So thank you to that person. Make sure you go do that as well. And it's the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show.